Welcome to the Eat This Book podcast. I'm Michael Whitworth. Each day we take a small piece of scripture and we sit with it. Not a quick snack that disappears before lunch, not a chore you check off of a list, but rather a meal meant to be savored. So pull up a chair. Let's eat. Imagine a relay race where the baton keeps getting dropped. Runner after runner takes the handoff, sprints a stretch, and then collapses before passing it on cleanly. The team never finishes because no single runner can carry the baton all the way to the line. Now, imagine one runner who never tires, never stumbles, never has to hand off, who simply carries the baton from the starting gun to the finish, alone, without interruption. The race that could never be completed by a succession of runners is finished by one who never stops running. The writer of Hebrews has been building toward this moment. He's shown that Jesus is a priest from a different order, by a different basis, not bloodline, but an indestructible life. And now he drives the point home with two words that change everything about how secure your standing with God really is. The first is oath. The second is forever. And it was not without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. But this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." The Levitical priests were never installed by an oath. They simply inherited the role by birth. You were born a Levite, you became a priest, no divine swearing required. The position passed down the family line like an heirloom. God never stood over the process and swore it into permanence, because the whole arrangement was temporary by design. But when it comes to Jesus, God swears. Quoting Psalm 110 again, the psalm that has been echoing through this whole section, the writer points to a divine oath. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. Remember what an oath meant back in chapter 6, God staking his own unchanging character behind a promise. The two unchangeable things. God doesn't swear about things that are provisional. He swears about things that are permanent. The oath itself tells you this priesthood is built to last forever. Hebrews then says, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. That word, guarantor, is doing enormous work. A guarantor is someone who personally backs a promise, who puts himself on the line to ensure it's kept. If you've ever needed someone to co-sign a loan, you know the idea. The guarantor says, if this falls through, hold me responsible. Jesus is the guarantor of the better covenant. He doesn't just announce it or administer it, he personally guarantees it with his own being. The covenant cannot fail because the one backing it cannot fail. This is the first time the word covenant appears in Hebrews, and it's about to become central. But notice how the writer introduces it, not as a contract or a legal arrangement, but as something secured by a person. The strength of the covenant is the strength of its guarantor, and the guarantor holds his office by the power of an indestructible life. And then the writer returns to the contrast between the many and the one. The former priests, he says, were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Here's the relay race. The Levitical priesthood was a long succession, priest after priest after priest, stretching across centuries. And the reason there were so many is grim. Death kept removing them. Every priest served until he died, and then someone else took the baton. The system was a chain of mortality, each link broken by a grave. No single priest could carry the work to completion because no single priest lived long enough. Jesus holds his priesthood permanently. There is no succession because there is no death to create one. He took the baton at the resurrection and he has never set it down. He never will. The race that 1,000 priests could not finish is carried without interruption by one who continues forever. And then comes one of the most comforting sentences in all of Scripture. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. He is able to save to the uttermost, completely, all the way, to the very end, not partially, not provisionally, not up to a point. The salvation Jesus provides reaches as far as it needs to reach, to the uttermost limit of your need, your failure, your distance from God. There is no case too far gone, no sin too deep, no person too lost for a salvation that saves to the uttermost. And the reason is breathtaking. since he always lives to make intercession for them. Right now, at this moment, Jesus is alive and interceding for his people. This isn't a one-time transaction completed at the cross and then filed away. The cross secured it, but the intercession continues. He always lives, and the content of that endless life is, in part, this. He is praying for you, standing before the Father on your behalf, never stopping, never sleeping, never forgetting your name. The same priest who died for you now lives for you, and what he does with his deathless life is intercede. When your faith is weak, he is interceding. When you fail again, he is interceding. When you forget him entirely, he does not forget you. He always lives to make intercession. Your standing with God does not depend on the strength of your prayers. It depends on the constancy of his. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. The writer piles up descriptions. Holy, that is, wholly devoted to God. Innocent, that is, without malice, without guile. Unstained, that is, untouched by the corruption that marks every other priest. Separated from sinners, not in the sense of distance or disdain, but in the sense of being utterly without the sin that defined those he came to save. And exalted above the heavens, seated now at God's right hand, the work complete. This is the priest who shared our flesh, who was tempted in every way, who wept in the garden, and who never once sinned. The combination is the whole point. He is near enough to sympathize and pure enough to save. Most people are one or the other. The priest who truly understands you is usually compromised by the same failures. The priest who is truly pure usually stands at a cold distance. Jesus is both close and clean, fully with us and fully without sin. Hebrews continues, he has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. The old high priest had to deal with his own sin before he could deal with anyone else's. Every sacrifice he made was shadowed by his own guilt. But Jesus had no sin of his own to address, so when he offered a sacrifice, all of it was for others, and he offered it once for all. Not daily, not yearly, once. Because the sacrifice was himself, and a perfect sacrifice never needs repeating. The endless repetition of the old system was its confession of inadequacy. The single sacrifice of Jesus is the proof of its sufficiency. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, Hebrews says, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. The law appointed weak men. The oath appointed a perfect son. And the contrast lands with finality. Weakness replaced by perfection, the many replaced by the one, the temporary replaced by the forever. Here's what we should savor from this passage. First, he saves to the uttermost, not part way, not on a sliding scale based on your performance, completely, all the way to the furthest reach of your need. Whatever you're afraid is beyond saving, the part of you you've hidden, the failure you keep repeating, the distance you feel you've created, the salvation Jesus provides reaches further than that. It saves to the uttermost. Second, he always lives to intercede. The most active thing happening in the universe right now includes this. Jesus is praying for you. Your security doesn't rest on your remembering to pray, or praying well, or praying enough. It rests on a high priest who never stops interceding, whose deathless life is poured out, in part, on your behalf. You are being prayed for right now by the one who cannot die. Third, close and clean at once. He is near enough to understand you completely and pure enough to save you completely. You don't have to choose between a God who sympathizes and a God who is holy. In Jesus, the two are one. He knows exactly what you carry, and he is utterly without the failure that would compromise his ability to help. If you're afraid you're beyond saving, that you've gone too far, failed too often, drifted too long, the phrase "to the uttermost" was written for you. There is no uttermost that the salvation of Jesus cannot reach. Wherever you are, however far, the rescue extends further. The question is not whether you've gone too far, it's whether you'll draw near. If your prayer life feels weak and inconsistent, and you carry guilt about how little you pray, how distracted you are, how often you forget, this passage moves the foundation. Jesus always lives to intercede. While your prayers stumble, his never do. Your relationship with God is not held up by the quality of your praying, it's held up by the constancy of his. Let that ease the shame and then pray anyway, knowing you're joining a prayer already in progress. If you felt that God either understands you or judges you, but can't be doing both, this passage holds them together. He is holy, innocent, unstained, and he shared your flesh and was tempted as you are. He is close and clean. The God who sees you most clearly is the same God who is most fully for you. Understanding and holiness are not a war in him. If you keep returning to the same sin and the same confession, wondering whether the repetition exhausts God's patience, remember that Jesus offered himself once for all. Your repeated confession is not a repeated sacrifice. The sacrifice was made once and it holds. You're not asking God to pay again. You're returning to ground that has already been secured. And if you've leaned on people who eventually failed you, mentors, leaders, anyone you trusted to carry you spiritually, this passage gives you a priest who continues forever. Every human runner eventually drops the baton. Jesus never does. The one carrying your salvation will not collapse before the finish line because he holds his office by a life that cannot end. Next time on Eat This Book, what if the greatest problem was never the law, but where it was written? Hebrews 8 introduces God's better covenant, not on tablets of stone, but on human hearts. Join me as we discover the promise that changes us from the inside out, and the God who says, I will remember their sins no more. Thanks for eating with me. Until next time, may the Word dwell in you richly.